It was a rainy morning in Los Angeles. The city hadn't fully awakened yet. The streets were filled with people starting their day, lost in their own routines. Robert Downey Jr. had started his day early, squeezing in a short break between meetings. He was dressed casually in a gray sweatshirt and a dark-colored cap, trying to avoid attention. He had learned how to disappear into crowds, but sometimes even the most ordinary moments could turn into something unexpected. He entered one of the quietest cafes in town, picking a secluded corner to sit in. After ordering his coffee, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling through the news, checking a few messages, reading a few articles. But this break wouldn't be as uneventful as he had imagined. A few tables away, a young man noticed him. His face was tense with hesitation. He clutched a notebook in his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the cover. His eyes were fixed on Robert as if he were trying to decide what to do. Finally, he took a deep breath, gathered his courage, and walked over to the table. "Excuse me, Mr. Downey." The young man smiled nervously, but his voice trembled slightly. "My name is Jake. I just wanted to say thank you. I never got the chance to before, but when I was a kid, you changed my life." Robert raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Really? How so?" "Traces of the past." Jake hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and began to speak. "I had a tough childhood. My father was an alcoholic, always angry, always fighting. My mother worked day and night just to keep us afloat. I felt so alone as a kid. But one day, I turned on the TV and watched Iron Man. That moment changed everything for me." Robert listened intently, noticing the emotion in Jake's voice. His eyes were glistening, but he kept talking. "Tony Stark was a man who had everything, but lost it all. Then he rebuilt himself, became someone completely different. That movie showed me that second chances were possible, and I took mine. Instead of following in my father's footsteps, I decided to study engineering because you inspired me." Robert remained silent for a moment, absorbing Jake's words. The young man's story struck a chord with him. He, too, had hit rock bottom before finding his way back. He nodded slightly. "Man, that's an incredible story." Jake smiled, but his voice was still shaky. "I just wanted you to know that if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here today." Sometimes a movie, a character, it can completely change someone's life. By now, other customers in the cafe had started to notice the conversation. The atmosphere had shifted. Robert took a deep breath before speaking. "You know, Jake, I've had my fair share of dark times too. When I was younger, I was ruining my own life. I was battling addiction, making all the wrong choices. But one day, someone believed in me, and that made me realize I had to change, just like you did." Jake's eyes widened. "Really?" Robert gave him a small, knowing smile and nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to truly understand the value of climbing back up. You made it, Jake, and I need you to understand something. It wasn't just me. You created your own hero." Jake thought for a moment. For so long, he had dreamed of thanking Robert, never realizing that the biggest thanks belonged to himself. "But still, you gave me hope. How could I forget that?" Robert smiled, pulling a card from his wallet and placing it on the table. "Now it's your turn. Here's my email. One day, when you change the world as an engineer, I want you to write to me, because I know your story is just beginning." Jake's hands trembled as he picked up the card. His eyes filled with emotion as he looked up at Robert. "Would you really do that?" Robert shrugged with a grin. "Of course, man, because everyone needs a hero, and sometimes they show up when you least expect it." The people in the cafe had been quietly observing, some visibly moved by what they had just witnessed. Robert and Jake exchanged a final nod before Jake turned to leave. He walked out of the cafe, carrying a moment he would never forget. Meanwhile, Robert leaned back and took a sip of his coffee. That day, during a simple coffee break, without even realizing it, he had changed another life. Sometimes, the smallest words can change someone's life. If this story moved you, take a moment to share someone who has inspired you in the comments. Who knows? Maybe one day, you'll be someone else's hero. Like, subscribe, and share. Stay with us for more inspiring stories.